I'm Dr. Carl Schreck. In this video, I'll be talking about the role that the mountains played in enhancing both the rainfall and flooding during Hurricane Helene. First, we'll talk about how the side of the mountain that faces the wind tends to get the most rain, and also how river valleys are collecting the rain, not just the rain that's falling directly on top of the river, but also the rain falling on either side of the valley gets funneled down into those rivers. And that's a big part of what caused the flooding to rise so rapidly during this hurricane. Finally, when you have a lot of rain on the side of a mountain, it also can cause major landslides by loosening up the soil. And we saw over 2,000 landslides during Hurricane Helene. Here's a graphic showing what happens when wind interacts with a mountain. Of course, the wind can't blow through the mountain, so it has to blow up and over the mountain. And when that happens, as the air is rising on the side of the mountain that faces the wind, the air cools off and starts to condense the moisture in the air, and that's when you get clouds and ultimately rainfall to form. Meanwhile, when the winds blow back down the other side of the mountain, it tends to be a lot drier and you have less rainfall. And this is a big part of what happens in our region just in general, and was obviously supercharged during Hurricane Helene. Western North Carolina is really unique in that we have both the wettest place east of the Mississippi down in Lake Toxaway, and the driest place east of the Mississippi in Asheville, just about 50 or 60 miles apart. And the reason for that is the direction that the wind tends to blow along our mountains. During a typical storm, the wind blows from the southwest, coming up from Georgia and up over those mountains, and then it sinks down into the valley into Asheville. So it's going up the mountain into Lake Toxaway, and it produces tons and tons of rain there. They get over 80 inches of rain a year. It's actually a temperate rainforest there. Meanwhile, the wind blows back down into the valley into Asheville, and Asheville gets less than 40 inches of rain, so half as much rain just 50 or 60 miles away. Now, during Hurricane Helene, the wind was generally blowing from the southeast, coming up from the Piedmont and South Carolina. And so a lot of the heaviest rain was occurring along the eastern escarpment, the initial ridges of the mountains. But of course, even as the wind was blowing back down into the valleys, it didn't dry out all that much, and we got plenty of rain here in the French Broad River Valley. Now, a big part of hydrology is that the rivers aren't just feeling the rain that's falling directly on the river. They're also collecting all the river that's falling on either side of them. And so when we have all these river valleys in our region, all that rain gets funneled very rapidly down into these rivers. And that's a big part of why the rivers rose so rapidly in a lot of these places, because the terrain is just so steep. The other issue that causes is that in a lot of places, the only areas flat enough to build are down on the river edge. And so that makes them even more vulnerable to a lot of the flooding in these events. Of course, the other issue with having tons of rain on these mountainsides is that it loosens up the soil and makes them more vulnerable to landslides. And we saw over 2,000 landslides during Hurricane Helene that resulted in dozens of deaths. In addition to causing all those deaths, it also played a role in hampering some of the recovery. So there's kind of two main roads that go through Asheville. There's Interstate 40 that runs east-west, and there's Interstate 26 that kind of runs north-south. Immediately after Hurricane Helene passed through, I-26 south of town was flooded out, and then I-26 north of town up in Tennessee, there was a landslide blocking it. And here I'm showing pictures of I-40 east and west, where I-40 eastbound going through Black Mountain had been covered up by mud from a landslide, and I-40 west of town going through the Pigeon River Gorge had been literally washed away for miles. This is a pretty steep area that the road goes through into Tennessee anyway. It's kind of a tight spot in normal conditions, right along the riverbank. And the river rose so much that it actually washed away miles and miles of road and completely wiped away the eastbound lanes of I-40. And took several months for them to get any kind of traffic through there. And then actually during the summer, another landslide caused another closure of I-40. They've since been able to open that, but at least as of this recording, it's still only one lane in either direction. But certainly in the days following the storm, having all these landslides and flooding on these major highways really hampered the ability of getting supplies into our region. It took a lot more effort and had to see a lot more Chinook helicopters, for example, bringing in some of those supplies. So in this video, we talked about how the side of the mountain facing the wind tends to get a lot more rain, and how mountains really enhance the rain that falls on them. In addition, the river valleys really concentrate all that rain into fairly localized areas and cause a lot of significant flooding when you do have that heavy rain. Finally, it also caused a lot of landslides, over 2,000 landslides that resulted in dozens of people dying and also really crippling a lot of the infrastructure for getting supplies in and out of the region.